I want to start with our design educators and just kind of ask you guys, you know, we're living in kind of crazy times, but what are some of the normal stressors of being a design educator?
I'll pop in this time. Maybe we'd like take turns. But I would say being a design educator requires that you are an expert in two fields at the same time. So you need to be able to stay up to date on professional design practices, technology, and you need to stay up to date on pedagogy. So sometimes it can feel a little overwhelming, you know, that aspect of being a designer and an educator. And then the other part of it, I think just working with students. I am a hardcore empath. I cry at television commercials. My office is stocked with tissues. And while most of my teaching days are full of joy, there are days that are pretty heavy with melancholy. I mentor students while they're going through some difficult times. I have students who are dealing with addiction. I have students that are dealing with food insecurity, housing insecurity, family issues, the stress of social media. And so, you can get a little bit of compassion fatigue. As designers in profession and in the classroom, we engage in critique. You know, we critique work, we evaluate things. And I know that one thing that I've noticed within like my design community, like community of friends, is a common theme of not knowing when to turn the critique off, right? So it's like, it doesn't stop at the work and it doesn't stop at the critique wall. It bleeds into how you see yourself, right? So we move into this space of judgment and it's like, we can't get out of it. So one of the things that I talk about with friends who are designers and with my students is to know when to stop the critique, to be very mindful of the critical voice in your head and to tell it, we're not doing a design critique anymore, it's done. Yeah. So that it doesn't bleed into the other parts of your life. So I think those are the daily, like normal stressors of being a design educator.
Yeah, I would say, to echo what Shannon said, really just dealing with the students. I mean, you don't know what their design exposures have been, and so you have to deal with the nuances of that. And so you also don't know if what you're disseminating to the class is actually landing. And so you want to make sure that they're actually positing the information and the concepts in a way that are actionable and can show results. Not only that, I guess like Shannon's school, I teach at an institution that has a lot of first generation students, as well as military veterans and military connected students. And so with that, a lot of them, are prioritizing whether or not school is first or work is first or family is first. And as a design educator, those stresses and pieces of their lives absolutely work their ways into the design work in the way of either blocking it or supporting it.
I just want to kind of follow up with something that Shannon spoke about earlier, especially being in the classroom or being a teacher. I think it's important to be aware of barriers or, outside concerns that students may be dealing with. I know you mentioned like food insecurities, family-related issues, addiction issues, things of that nature. And I think that it's important to be aware of those things because those things can create a barrier to learning.
So kind of to piggyback on that, what's our responsibility as design educators to our students in that way? I mean, I have students that email me all kinds of stuff. Some of it's really personal, some of it's, surface level. And I'm always, kind of unsure about how deep to go into those kind of spaces with them, when they share things that are going on in their personal lives or things that are causing them stress and anxiety that are affecting their ability to do their, schoolwork. I question what is my role to them. So how do you guys handle it? I know Shannon, you mentioned to me before that you have a direct communication with your students about mental health.
Yeah. I think part of the thing that I recognized as a problem as a student was that the things that I dealt with that were connected to race or identity or, you know, economics, that a lot of my classmates and my faculty, they were completely unaware of it. It was not present in their mind. They weren't looking for it. So whenever there were times where, you know, having to pay rent and having to work, you know, if you don't have somewhere to live, like, how are you going to get through school? So, you know, you might have to compromise on a project in order to go to work and get something done. And then the criticism that you receive for that when you get to school makes all of the problems feel worse. And I just feel like as an educator, that students need to feel seen. And they also need to be able to see themselves in the people that they're around. So one of my slogans is, if you can see it, you can be it. So I try to be really transparent with my students about the things that I went through as a student, the things that I had to overcome, what I was able to accomplish, so that they feel like they can do it and they feel less lonely. So to, you know, be candid, you know, I was in college during the 2008 financial crisis. Our student loans were slashed. I lost my job. I was an older student. I was 28 at the time. I was self-supported. And I wound up in my last year of school having to choose between completing my degree or giving up my apartment. So am I going to have a house or am I going to have a college degree? And I gave up the apartment, and I wound up sleeping in my studio on campus, you know, under my desk. I slept in my car. I crashed at friends' houses. I bought a gym membership so that I would have somewhere to shower. And I finished that degree. And the minute I finished that degree, all of the problems I had went away. You know, in my graduating class, there were very few of us who walked into jobs as we left school. And I landed a fellowship at Chronicle Books in San Francisco. So within a month of finishing my degree, I had a job, I had an apartment, I had food. All of the problems I had went away because I had access to work and income. So I try to be really transparent with my coworkers, with my students, with my friends who teach about what my experience was as a student. A lot of people are really surprised when they hear that story. And I think for me, if I can model it and make it transparent, people will be more aware to look for it when it's in their classroom.
First of all,
Yes.
Can I just say that? Like, I mean, seriously,
Yes.
that's such a great, you know, kind of testimony to share to, you know, others and your students. And, you know, I applaud your openness to do that because, yeah, I think a lot of our students are in, you know, situations that we wouldn't imagine that they might be in. And so I think sharing those types of personal stories kind of helps them to realize that they're not alone in that. And so I appreciate that a lot. David, you were going to say something?
I was gonna just applaud that too, and I'm just shocked. I don't have a story like that. Well, maybe one similar, but not having to make that type of choice. First teaching, or at least my first few years teaching, I always thought, as a professor, I don't want the students to see me as being soft, so I'm not going to dig into their personal lives, and I don't want to overshare mine. And I would say that thinking about that, I guess putting it into context, I'm looking at them like professionals, and I want them to see me as a professional. So they're my clients, and also I'm their client. And a lot of the times in these client to provider relationship, there's not a discussion on mental health and what's going on and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you literally are like, what are the needs of the project? this is X, this is what you'll deliver, and we'll just talk through that. Well, in realizing that teaching about design business practices, you do want to initiate a level of personality into that relationship. And so what I started doing is, asking my students, hey, how things going? Is anything really affecting your work beyond school? And then talking about things that are relevant to me with them, things that we could find common ground on.
So it's been a really interesting journey for me as well, just to kind of open myself up to my students and present as a human, as a first, and not just kind of like this role of professor. But I do think that kind of what to David's point earlier, that identity plays a role in almost everything that you do, and I think parts of that pressure to always be guarded and always be professional comes from being a Black female professor, and wanting to have the respect of, other people, not just students, but faculty. And so there was less kind of room in my mind to be kind of that empathetic human.
I just want to chime in and say, it sounds like the overshadowing or overarching point that you guys are all making is the idea of normalizing, right? The idea of saying, you know what? We're all human. We all go through things. We all have ups and downs. And I think that it's important to make that a part of the playbook as educators, to let your students know, hey, you know what? I'm here if you need anything. You can't solve everyone's problems by any means. But you know what? Sometimes students just need a listening ear.
I'd like to kind of transition into talking about some things that we might not be able to help with. As soon as, kind of the pandemic took over and, we were asked to leave campus and start to do our distance learning, I immediately began receiving emails from students that said, I don't have a laptop, I don't have software, how am I going to, complete the semester? And honestly, I was lost. I mean, I was just as confused as they were. I didn't have a plan yet. And so now that we've had a little bit of time to kind of figure out where we are in this, and that we know that this is our new reality for right now, it brings up issues of kind of additional stressors, for students dealing with access, or limited access. Has that been an issue for either one of you guys, or how has that come up and how have you kind of addressed it?
Yeah, we definitely had that issue transitioning where, being able to walk into a studio classroom where computers and software are provided, that a quiet space is provided, is it's a bit of an equalizer for students. It gives them all sort of a common ground. And when we went to distance learning, it became obvious, some students didn't have access to a computer of their own. Some students, live in a home with 5 siblings, share bedrooms, and don't have a quiet space. So sort of the disparity of access to resources became more apparent, more visible. And I think that was something that I tried to be mindful of. Our school did a good job of responding pretty quickly, buying up computers, distributing computers to students. And as the new semester approaches, our school is providing licenses for Adobe Creative Cloud and computers for all of our students. So I'm really thankful that our college is doing things to bridge the gap of access for our students.
So let's think about our normal day-to-day routines. I was in the Slack channel for our summit, and I saw some people discuss what some of their challenges were, in terms of mental health and anxiety. And people mentioned, feeling sad because, you know, they were away from family and friends, and also the anxiety of having to kind of figure out how to get work done when you're at home all day and it seems like you have a ton of time, but you're having to figure out how to manage that time differently because it's all lumped together. You know, you're not leaving to go to the office or to your, you know, classroom. So let's talk about some of that, some of this new normal, and like how you're navigating that space. I'll start with David because I follow you on Instagram. And I've noticed that you've been posting a lot of like new graphic work, and you seem like you've been utilizing your your kind of quarantine time well. So just can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I guess I'll start with the first part. So my drive to my university or my institution is 45 one way, which means since we've been on COVID lockdown, that's 2 hours of my day that I've now retained. So in those 2 hours, I've decided to be a little more fit. I run every day. A friend of mine, when the quarantine started, challenged me to run a mile a day. So I run a mile a day, and then I post my results in a selfie on my Instagram story. And then the second thing is I decided to start lettering and challenge myself to letter. And I've got a couple friends, Mary Kate McDevitt and Simone Wilder, that I've looked at over the years as being great at what they do. And I wondered what it would be like to start to do lettering myself. And I took the time to letter a piece every day. I think I'm at maybe 50 days straight now. And just from that small little exercise, I've been contacted by people to do lettering. I'm now included in this national design show put on by these people in Bulgaria for Black Lives Matter. I've done pieces for some local shops in Nashville. I've been asked to produce stickers and t-shirts and other stuff. And all of this stems from, one, wanting to try out a new thing, and then two, I guess, being seen, or at least my design work being seen versus just being discussed. And so, I mean, it's a lot in addition to being a tenure track professor and getting those materials put together and attempting to plan for a totally online semester in contrast to the spring semester, which was partially full contact and partially fully online. And keeping up with my family. And so, yeah, it has not been a dull moment.
Ever since we went into like the COVID quarantine, I feel like I have less time than I did before. So I have two kids. They will be 4 and 6 in August and September. My daughter was in her first year of kindergarten, and my husband is also a designer. So you have 2 parents working full-time, 2 small children, and all of a sudden we are without a school day for our daughter, and we are without childcare for our son. So it was like we took on 2 more jobs in addition to the jobs that we already have. So the way that we have had to adapt is with a really rigorous adherence to a schedule. Our work week, we were like really lucky. We used to be able to have like a 4-day work week. We would work Monday through Thursday, and then we would have Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Our work week is now a 6-day work week. It's Monday through Saturday. Sunday is our day of rest. But we try to sprinkle in a little, some family fun time in the mornings, so that it sort of feels like half weekend, half work day. And we schedule in alone time for ourselves. Even with the kids, like we'll each take one kid and separate them for a little while, so that everybody sort of gets their own headspace. It has been challenging looking at social media and seeing so many friends of mine just doing some amazing design work. It's like everybody found this time to do design work, so I'm a little envious. I have to navigate that. So I try to get invested, like with my kids when we start making things. You know, if they want to get out paint, like I start busting out my gouache and practicing some hand illustration skills. But yeah, it's the adjustment, you know, on a family level and work level has been intense, and using a schedule has been helpful.
I think all of us are parents, so we're all kind of like, very, very heavy head nods.
I think a lot of people have handled the COVID quarantine, the COVID pandemic in so many different ways. A lot of people have found time to kind of develop a new hobby, you know, work on themselves in other ways. Other people have found that, you know, that they've been so busy that they appreciate the downtime, and that's important as well. But I do want to highlight the fact that you have to do what works for you. And however you're going to get through this quarantine, do it the best way that you know. It's not easy to get through this alone. You know, seeking out support groups in the community, faith-based groups, if you guys are, you know, faith-based organizations are available as well. Online support groups, local therapists. It's okay to go talk to someone about these things. This is out of the norm for us. It's going to create emotional distress in some ways. So I think it's important to be self-aware and to engage in self-care habits as much as you possibly can. Journaling, yoga, meditation, cooking, painting, whatever your heart desires. I think it's important to find that time and really engage in that.
I think I've gone through all the different possible stages of quarantine. You know, and managing time looks different, I think, for me from day to day. Some, or maybe some weeks I feel more productive than others. For me personally, one very surprising thing that came out of this quarantine was I have rediscovered a love of drawing, even when I should be probably doing other things. I'll find myself kind of stealing hours out of the day or at night after my son goes to bed, and I, you know, draw for hours, you know. And so that, you know, that, to your point, Ebony, that's become my outlet. But you know, again, I think resources are different, and opportunities for that time looks different for everyone. So I'm grateful that I do have that. Not everyone does, and so that can be really challenging. And I want to ask Ebony a question about, you know, I think a lot of us say, you know, we're stressed out, we're anxious, we might feel like we're depressed or sad, you know, given maybe the constant kind of negative news cycle. How do we negotiate whether those feelings are normal or when they transition over into kind of a space where we need to seek, you know, professional help?
I think it's important to recognize that we are human and we do have variances in our emotions, right? We do have natural emotional responses. So I think it's okay, you know, to have emotions. But to answer your question, if you have a persistent, for example, low mood, where you're tearful on a daily basis, where you're completely distracted on a daily basis, where you're having, you know, difficulties with sleep, or on the opposite end of that, maybe you're sleeping too much, you're disengaging, you know, those may be some signs and symptoms that, you know what, maybe I'm dealing with a depressed mood. Maybe I should seek out someone to talk to about this. Typically with a depressed mood, we may see some of those symptoms that I just mentioned for about 2 weeks or so on a persistent, consistent basis. And that may prompt us to say, you know what, this is outside of my norm. And you may want to seek out assistance for that. Some assistance that you may seek for that, maybe talking to your primary care physician about what you're going through, or you may seek out assistance with like a local therapist. A great resource for finding someone to speak with about what you may be dealing with is Psychology Today. And you can put in your local zip code and it'll bring up tons and tons of resources for therapists. Physical symptoms may be more sweating, more heart racing, headaches, things of that nature. Usually with anxiety, we look for that on a consistent and persistent basis, more on like a 6 months type of thing. But I want to highlight the fact that it's okay to go seek treatment if you don't necessarily have these symptoms for X amount of time. My point with that is if you feel like you're not operating at your normal self, whatever that looks like, if you're feeling outside of yourself, if you're having more worries or sad moods or low moods than you usually have, it's okay to seek out therapy, right? It's okay to go talk to someone about the day-to-day ups and downs that you may have. And again, online therapy resources are available, as well as some people are still doing face-to-face as well. But I think it's important to note your own self and what you're used to and what may be noted as the outside of the norm of what you may be dealing with.
It brings up the question of, whether or not there's a stigma, associated with mental health, particularly in some communities. And so I don't know if you guys want to speak on that, Shannon.
Yeah, that was sort of like what I was thinking about the whole time that Ebony was speaking, was that like you're basically giving people permission. And I think a lot of us, especially certain demographics, need that permission. I know like in my own like Mexican American culture, there are a lot of things that are considered white, right? Like going to therapy is what white people do. Yoga is a white people thing. Meditation, that's for white people. And it's like, we are robbing ourselves of these resources that are going to help us, and we wind up disproportionately affected because within our own culture, we sort of prevent ourselves from having access to those things. So I'm really open. There's a whole mental health statement in my syllabus. The very first day of class, I talk to students about mental health. And I'm really transparent. Like I tell my students, like I've been in therapy, like as a teenager in my 20s, I'm in therapy now. And the stigma of therapy is like, you're going to therapy because you're crazy. And the way I try to frame it is like, if you want to be healthier, you can hire a dietitian, and there's no shame in that, right? You can hire a coach, like a gym coach, somebody to physically train your body to make you healthier, and there's no shame in that, right? Like we take pictures of those healthy meals, and we take our pictures of our workouts, and we put it on social media, but nobody wants to talk about how great their new therapist is, or some new coping skill that they learned to deal with anxiety or depression or stress. And I think we are robbing ourselves when we don't celebrate our mental wellness as much as we celebrate our finances and our physical health. So I try to be really transparent about that with my students. And I'm also really transparent about moods. Like most of my classes, the first 15 minutes just starts with a check-in. I had an evaluator. I'm also tenure track, right? So I'm getting evaluated every semester. And an evaluator said, one thing that you did in your class that I kind of questioned was you walked in and you told your students that you were a little bit stressed out that day and kind of tired, but then you carried on class the same way that you usually do. She's like, I don't think you needed to tell them that because we couldn't tell. And I said, I tell them that because sometimes you can't tell, right? Like they need to see that like you can be struggling with something and still be functional at the same time. So I try to be really candid with like, some days we come into work and we're like, I am really tired and I am kind of grouchy, but I'm going to get this done to my best of, ability anyways. So just sort of modeling that.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, it's important for designers and design students to tap into their feelings and emotions. I mean, we design for people, we design experiences. So if we're creating those interactive experiences, it's important for us to engage and have an awareness of, how people react to things. And I think that it does everyone a disservice to negate that part of us, and kind of try to separate, our feelings, from what we do professionally.
Last semester, I had like 2 students have parents that died. And some talked about it before their parents died, and some talked about it in the process of their parents dying. And unfortunately, I've had that experience myself, so I could, talk to them about that at that particular time. I mean, mine passed at 24, so they're right in the same, age and period, of reckoning and grieving with that. But yeah, I mean, it really just depends on what the topic is. I mean, some are dealing with bosses that won't give them time off,
Right.
In order to pursue things, or they're literally gonna quit their job in order to finish the program, and then struggle for a while. And yeah, I mean, it runs the gamut on what we have to discuss. And yes, I definitely don't have all the answers, but we have resources at school, we have resources in the community that we can, send them to.
Yeah, I try to send students to the University Counseling Center as much as possible, only because the topics that people come to me with are so heavy that I'm like, I don't need to be the only person you're talking to about this. Like, please, I'm I can be a listening ear, but I mean, there's been so many times I'm like, please go, call this number, go and make an appointment,
Yes.
Yeah.
Some of them do, thankfully, and some of the male students, they have a hard time, they're like, I don't want to do that,
The stigma,
but,
again, that's the stigma. We also have to be, we also have to recognize that some people just don't have that, right? Some people don't have that support network that they can go talk to, that they can feel comfortable sharing whatever experiences that they may be going through. Also, keep in mind that, if you're dealing with something so personal or something like that, you may not want to share that with a family member or a close friend. You may want to just talk to someone who has no bias, no game, no foot in the game in the situation. You want to talk to someone that is neutral. So that's why I think it's important to push out those resources, those community resources, university resources, online resources, because I think sometimes it's just easier to talk to someone who doesn't know you or doesn't know, or that you feel like is not going to go and share your business with someone else, right? So I think there's various situations that are at play, but I think it's important to make sure students are aware of what resources may be out there. With that being said, this is not only a topic for students, this is a topic for us as staff members, as employees, you guys as educators. It's important to take care of your well-being, your mental health as well. I know, Shannon, you made mention that you're in therapy now. Great, that is great. Seek that therapy, utilize it, because you can't be your best self and deliver those services or education to students if you aren't taking care of yourself. So again, that's for you guys as well.
Before this whole thing happened, I was already dealing with a really traumatic family event. I was diagnosed with anxiety adjustment disorder. My son at 2.5 years old, so this was last summer, just started having tonic-clonic seizures that came out of nowhere. And he would sleep next to me, and I discovered it because I woke up in the middle of the night and he was having a full-on seizure.
Oh my God.
Next to me. It was terrifying.
Yeah.
And it really, it puts your mental and your physical state into a panic mode.
Exactly.
And so I was like, I need to talk to somebody, and I need to figure out how to get control over sort of that panic response. So I was kind of already on that. And when coronavirus happened, I was like, why not hop on in? We're already dealing with all this other stuff. My husband is Filipino. It's another brown Catholic machismo culture, Mexican culture. And so there's already the stigma about seeking therapy or seeking help. And it's even worse for the men.
Oh my God, yeah.
And I know, like, you know, with my own husband, we've had talks where I'm like, I think we should go to therapy. Like, you should go to therapy. And he's like, I don't need it.
Yeah.
And it's funny. You know, I finally,
David's like, no.
yeah.
Yeah.
And after like 2
See?
sessions, he was like, this is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm figuring these things out about myself and, like, you know, feeling better. So
You know,
yeah, I think, like, that is a thing that like men also really need to hear, is like, it is okay to go to therapy.
I have my clients, I had several men cry in therapy, and they're like, no, it's okay. I'm not crying. I'm just, there. And I'm like, it's okay. And then the next session we'll meet up, and they're like, you know what? I needed to cry. Like, I needed to be able to have that space to do that, because I'm constantly in man mode. I'm a provider. I have to make sure that things are going well. I can't show any vulnerability. I can't be weak. But when I cried last week, they feel like it's just like a relief, like something's lifted off of them. And so I hear that all the time, when I do work with men, like, they sometimes need a safe space, but getting them to that point, that's an issue.
Yeah,
So,
but my Black male students, I think they just have a lot of pressure on them to kind of fit into,
Make it.
what'd you say?
To make it. To just make
To
it.
survive, right?
Yes.
Just to survive in general, but then to kind of, have to be strong, or have to kind of exude kind of a certain strength, or, and honestly, a lot of that pressure comes from their families too. Maybe being there for their moms or their siblings, or, whatever, and they can't be the weak one. They can't be the one that breaks down, and they have to try to keep it all together. And they're not. I mean, these are babies. At least I see them like, I'm like, you're 19, like, you can't hold the world together, And so I think, you're right, like, giving them that kind of permission to just say, like, you can cry about that. Like, even if you don't want to do that with your family or even your friends, like, there are spaces that exist where you can go and have those moments and express those thoughts. And even if you're just angry at the world, that's what those resources are there for. And so yeah, I think that, like, kind of our socioeconomic backgrounds, our identities, all of those things play such a big part in, like, the different kind of burdens we bear, and our views on our mental health. We're kind of in the midst of a new civil rights movement, on the heels of a lot of police brutality and violence. And I know I've shared quite a bit about teaching at an HBCU, but the things that constant feed of, like, negative news and kind of terrible things that are happening has definitely impacted the spirits and the mood of my students and myself. So yeah, I'm curious to hear, how that impacts either you and your teaching, or your students. Do you anticipate these issues coming up, or have they already?
Whew, this was a big one. I think because of, like, my own personal experience, my own family experience, like, the first thing that I try to acknowledge is that I know that my skin tone comes with a level of privilege that my Black family members do not have access to. My cousins who have Black children and Black husbands, they have daily experiences with racism. They navigate daily racist experiences that I don't. And this is something that I've been aware of for a while. As a family, we recognize the physical and the mental toll that takes on people. It's been a point of frustration and conversation in my family for a long time. In my family, I have a cousin who died in police custody. He was having a mental health episode, and what he needed was mental health resources, and what he got was arrested in police custody and neglect. And that was something that happened in my family, around the time of Trayvon Martin. So just sort of this explosion of like a social tolerance of violent racism and a history of police brutality sort of entered this national dialogue at the same time that it had reached like a fever pitch in my own family. So that is something that like I've been aware of, and I also understand that like I have students who deal with that too. You know, we talk about visual storytelling and representation and metaphor and all of these things, and identity comes to play in that. Like one of my favorite exercises in my visual communications class is we watch music videos. So we'll watch, you know, Flying Lotus, pretty much like all of the Khalil Joseph videos because I love his work. And we will pick apart all of the visual symbols, all the metaphors, and we talk about like, this is how you take an emotion and an idea, and this is how you give it a symbol. And this is how you pair symbols together to make a metaphor to tell a story. And naturally, you know, because of the demographic of my students, because of my experience, as we are talking about graphic design and storytelling and metaphor, the stories that are attached to our lives come up. So, you know, with my students, you know, when we hit this point, you know, we're already in COVID, and then we have, you know, this series of events with Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and then this eruption of protest, which I think was a long overdue. Like I lived in LA in 1992. I was, during the Watts uprising. And I think, you know, for the last 10 years, I've been like, how is this not happening again? So I was not surprised by the reaction at all. I was sort of relieved. And I remember like the Monday after, you know, logging in to Zoom to talk to my students, and I was like, what we are not going to do is jump into business as usual. That's not good for anybody's mental health, right? So I sort of came into the class like, I just want to give us like a section of time at the beginning of class to acknowledge that we are living through a really intense historical moment, and just absorb that for a minute. And think about, you know, that this is sort of an outward demonstration that is representing how a lot of people have been living and feeling their whole lives. And so we just sort of like stopped and acknowledged that. And I think that that was helpful for students. And also for myself, I was like, I can't walk in here feeling all these feels and just conduct this class like I don't feel that way.
Right.
Yeah, that's sort of how I approached that moment while teaching.
Wow. Well, so I'm sorry about your family member. I think, you know, it's so unfortunate that so many people have those types of stories that they can share.
I haven't had students since the George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery stuff happened. I mean, I definitely in my own experience, because I run every day, the Ahmaud Arbery tragedy hit me quite hard.
Yeah.
I'm actually at a lake house in Tennessee now. And I've been going for my runs every day. And the first thing my kids and family say when I walk out the door is be careful, because it's not the neighborhood that we live in. And that's nothing, you know, that I take lightly. When I go out of the country, I make sure to run and document my runs there. And I've not thought about not being safe at the hands of a general citizen, much less a security, you know, force. And so, yeah, it's been a bit unnerving and weird to think that your daily, what you would consider mundane activity, could be affected by the thought of something happening. Not even you having personal history, but just the thought of something happening. So that's one piece. The other piece is, yes, like the catalyst being the George Floyd death and the movement thereafter. I don't know what it's gonna look like, and it's strange to say that I have a slight anxiety about that. You know, to come in and say, well, it won't be business as usual, but what is business of today?
Mm-hmm.
Especially with my students, you know, in my own mind, am I thinking, are they seeing me in a different light now that these events have occurred? Or because people are saying that the system should be changed and reformed, what side of that are they actually on? Do they agree or do they disagree? How might that affect our exchange? You know, I don't want to be unrealistic and to think that my passion may not be seen as anger or might be seen as aggression, you know, in the blink of an eye. Like, that's not reality. I can still be seen as aggressive because of how I might state something or what my tone might be. And what retaliation may be like if that is the case. So it's a moving thought. You know, it's a moving thought as we in society evolve and as we try to devolve all of the systemic issues that have been built to hold us back from actualized progress.
Yeah, those are really good points. I do like a mini thesis project with my Design 2 students where I give them like 7 weeks to define their own problem, choose how to solve it with design, choose their own formats, gather their own content. And the majority of my students will pick, topics related to social justice, sexism, the environment. I have not seen a project about, blatantly about racism yet, but I anticipate that I will probably see that next semester. So yeah, my students, when given sort of creative freedom, will gravitate towards subjects like that they want to talk about.
So were there any other kind of last parting words anyone wanted to kind of offer to our listeners today? No? Good.
I would offer 2 resources.
Okay, yeah.
For educators. There is Dr. J. Luke Wood has a workshop called Black Minds Matter. And I'm taking it for the 2nd time. And I would highly encourage every educator to take that class so that you are more culturally competent to teach students of different identities, different races, different demographics in your classroom. And then our own college put together a workshop called Culturally Responsive Teaching and Learning. And I would encourage other universities and colleges to look into doing something similar. I think a lot of it starts with just training your faculty how to be competent when it comes to dealing with students in the classroom, their different experiences, and the stories that they're telling. So those are 2 resources I would encourage every college to take a look at.
I'm particularly interested in like kind of that intersection of like identity and mental health and kind of design and, and how all of those things work together and affect each other. So if anyone listening has any ideas on that too, we'd love to talk about it a little bit more in the Slack channel, and we're all also available through email. I'll put our email addresses somewhere so that people can reach us and maybe further this conversation. Thank you guys again. This was a great discussion. I appreciate it. Bye. Take care.
All right.